The laughter hit before the meeting did. 70 people in the conference room. Glass walls. Too bright. Too exposed. My name glowing in red on the screen behind him. Kira Daniel Mercer said, smiling like this was a performance you've done solid work over the years. A pause. Just long enough to make everyone lean in, but you've become a bottleneck. The word didn't land all at once. It echoed, expanded, crawled under my skin. 15 years. 15 years of building the logistics backbone of Stratix Dynamics. I designed the routing system that kept our East Coast operations alive during the hurricane blackout. I trained half the analysts in that room. I stayed through nights no one else even knew existed, when servers failed, when contracts hung by a thread, when one wrong call could have cost us everything. And now a bottleneck. A few people chuckled. Someone coughed to hide it. Most just stared at the table, pretending this wasn't happening. Daniel clicked to the next slide. Operational restructuring. My role marked obsolete. We're moving toward faster, more adaptive systems, he continued. Younger teams, automation, efficiency, younger. That one hurt more than obsolete. I didn't move, didn't speak. My hands rested flat against the table fingers, steady like they didn't belong to me. And effective immediately, Daniel added, your department will be reassigned under Ryan Cole. Ryan, my former intern. He straightened in his chair, trying not to look proud. I kept my eyes forward. Because in that moment, I understood something cold and precise. This wasn't just restructuring. This was removal, and it had been planned. Before we continue, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. When you do, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping meaningful stories reach someone who might need them at exactly the right time. I'm also curious, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments. I read more of them than you might think. The next part of this story includes some fictional elements and AI-assisted storytelling created to deepen the emotional and educational experience. And if today isn't the right moment for you to keep going, that's okay. Step back, take care of yourself. The story will still be here, waiting whenever you're ready. Do you even know who you're talking to? The voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut clean through the room, sharp enough to stop every whisper, every shifting chair, every forced breath. I didn't turn immediately. I already knew that voice. A slow, uneven step echoed against the polished floor. Then another, the soft, unmistakable tap of a cane. When I finally looked back, the air in the room had changed. Arthur Calloway, founder of Stratix Dynamics. He hadn't attended a full staff meeting in years. Daniel froze mid-motion, one hand still hovering near the clicker. Mr. Calloway, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us. Clearly, Calloway replied. One word. Flat. Controlled. Heavy with something older than authority ownership. He moved closer each step, deliberate, his eyes locked on Daniel, like he was measuring something already broken. Do you have any idea who she is? No one spoke. Not Ryan. Not HR. Not the executives lining the walls like silent witnesses to a quiet execution that had just been interrupted. Calloway lifted his cane slightly, pointing it toward me. This woman, he said, is the reason this company didn't collapse in 2011. A ripple moved through the room. Subtle, but real. When our logistics network failed across 3 states, she rebuilt it in 48 hours, while the rest of you were still drafting contingency plans. My throat tightened. I hadn't heard that story spoken out loud in years. When we were about to lose the Orion contract, he continued. She stayed in this building for 3 nights straight. No rotation, no backup, just results. Daniel shifted his weight. His confidence, so polished minutes ago, was cracking at the edges. With respect, he said carefully, we're not questioning her past contributions. But the business has evolved. Business evolves. Calloway interrupted because of people like her. Silence. Thick. Absolute. For the first time since the meeting began, Daniel Mercer had nothing to say. The meeting didn't end with applause. It ended with avoidance. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Laptops snapped shut a little too quickly. People stood, gathered their things, and left in controlled silence as if any sudden movement might pull attention back to what had just happened. No one looked at me directly, not even Daniel. He stayed near the screen, pretending to scroll through something on his tablet, jaw, tight shoulders, rigid. The performance was over. Now he was recalculating. Ryan moved slower than the others. He hesitated beside his chair, fingers brushing the edge of the table, before finally stepping toward me. "Kira, can we talk?" His voice was lower than usual. Careful. I met his eyes for a moment, then looked back down at the empty notepad in front of me. "You're leading the department now," I said evenly. "You don't need permission." He flinched. I didn't know he was going to do it, like that he rushed. Daniel said it would be a private transition. I thought Ryan. He stopped. The room around us was nearly empty now. Just the hum of the projector and the distant sound of elevator doors opening and closing. "You sat there," I said quietly, "and you said nothing." His shoulders dropped. The weight of it landed. "I couldn't risk it," he admitted. I nodded once. "I know. That was the truth." I did know. I'd seen that kind of fear before ambition, wrapped in survival instinct. But understanding it didn't make it easier to stand on the receiving end. "I'm sorry," he said, the words barely audible now. I didn't respond. After a second, he turned and walked out, closing the door gently behind him. The silence that followed felt heavier than the meeting itself. I stayed where I was, hands still resting on the table, staring at nothing. 17 minutes. That's all it had taken to rewrite 15 years. And somewhere beneath the quiet, something sharper began to form. Not anger. Clarity. The email arrived before I even made it back to my desk. Mandatory HR. Meeting 3 o'clock. No subject line beyond that. No explanation. Just a calendar block that felt less like an invitation and more like a controlled response. By the time the clock reached 3, the building had settled into an unnatural calm. Conversations dipped when I walked past. Screens became suddenly fascinating. Emma Lawson from HR greeted me with a practiced smile as I stepped into the glass-walled office. "Kira, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Daniel was already there. Composed again. Recovered. Like the earlier fracture had been filed down and hidden beneath a polished surface. "Let's keep this constructive," he said, folding his hands neatly on the table. Constructive. Emma cleared her throat. "There's been some confusion following this morning's meeting," she began carefully. "We're currently reviewing all restructuring decisions to ensure alignment with company policy." I nodded once. "And my role." She hesitated just a fraction too long. "Under evaluation." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Nothing is finalized, Kira. We want to make sure your experience is utilized effectively moving forward. Utilized, not respected, not retained, repositioned." "How long does this evaluation take?" I asked. "A week, possibly 2, Emma replied. "You'll remain on full pay during that time." Paid silence. I let the words settle. Across the table, Daniel watched me, not apologetic, not defensive. Calculating, measuring how much I understood. This wasn't damage control, it was containment. "Understood," I said calmly. No argument, no resistance. That seemed to surprise them more than anything else. Emma offered a small, relieved nod. Daniel leaned back, tension easing slightly in his shoulders. They thought the situation had stabilized, that the interruption this morning had been absorbed, neutralized. But as I stood to leave, I caught something in Daniel's expression just for a second. Not confidence. Urgency. Like someone who had been forced to pause a plan, not abandon it. In the hallway, the air felt colder than before. My phone buzzed in my hand. Unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. That was bold. He won't forget it. No name, no context. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Then locked the screen. Because if there was one thing I'd learned after 15 years inside systems like this, moves like today didn't happen by accident. And they never ended quietly. If you agree with the way I handled that meeting, staying calm, saying nothing, and choosing to observe instead of react, then leave a 1 in the comments. Sometimes the strongest move isn't speaking louder. It's knowing when to stay silent and let the truth surface on its own. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I sat at my desk long after the floor had thinned out, the overhead lights dimmed to their evening setting. The office looked the same, orderly, familiar, but something underneath it had shifted. I opened my laptop. If Daniel's move had been calculated, then there had to be a reason. People like him didn't make public plays without securing what came after. My inbox was already different. Access threads I used to be copied on had stopped. Reports were being redirected. Quietly, systematically. But one message stood out. Procurement access request, approved. The sender, Ryan Cole. I frowned and opened the attachment. Temporary elevated permissions. Vendor contract editing rights. That didn't make sense. Those permissions were tightly controlled, restricted to me and the finance controller for a reason. They allowed someone to adjust invoice structures, reroute approvals, even alter payment flows before they hit audit thresholds. Ryan didn't need that level of access. Daniel didn't either, unless a familiar tension settled in my chest. I leaned forward, pulling up the internal dashboard. My credentials still worked for now. Transaction logs, last 30 days. Nothing obvious at first, just routine entries, approved invoices, standard vendor cycles. Then I narrowed the filter. New vendors. A name appeared I didn't recognize. VX Advisory Group. The amounts were small, just below the threshold that triggered secondary review. One payment, then another, then a pattern, same structure, same timing, same routing path. I felt it immediately, the echo of something I'd seen before. Years ago. Different department, different names, same technique, split transactions, controlled access, delayed visibility. I sat back slowly, letting the realization settle. This wasn't restructuring, it was positioning. Removing me wasn't about efficiency, it was about access. And suddenly, Daniel's urgency made perfect sense. He didn't just want me out of the way, he needed me gone before I saw this. I reached for my phone, then stopped. No sudden moves. Not yet. Because if I was right, this wasn't just a bad decision. It was something far more precise. And far more dangerous. I didn't sleep much that night. Every number I'd seen kept replaying in my head, amounts just under review limits, vendor names that felt manufactured access permissions that had no logical justification. By morning, the conclusion was no longer a suspicion. It was a pattern, and patterns meant intent. I arrived earlier than usual. The parking lot was still half empty, the building washed in pale morning light. My badge scanned without issue. A small window still open. Inside, everything felt quieter than normal. Not peaceful, controlled. I went straight to my office and closed the door. No hesitation this time. I pulled up the logs again, expanding the search window. 60 days, then 90. The pattern widened. More transactions. Same vendor, same structure, always routed through recently adjusted permissions, and every change traced back to one authorization chain, Daniel Mercer. I exhaled slowly. So this wasn't a test, not a mistake, not even a risky shortcut. This was deliberate. I printed a sample of the transactions and slipped the pages into a folder, then paused, listening. Footsteps passed outside my office. Voices, low, careful. They already knew something was happening. I needed to move before they closed the gap. I shut down my workstation and transferred the key files to an encrypted drive I kept for system backups. Something I'd set up years ago for crisis recovery scenarios no one else had thought to plan for. Old habits. They were about to matter. By the time the office started filling, I was already finishing. The last file copied over. Clean, complete, untouched. A soft knock broke the silence. I turned. Emma stood in the doorway, a folder in her hands, her expression more strained than yesterday. "Kira," she said quietly, "we need to talk." I held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." As I stood, I slid the drive into the inner lining of my bag out of sight, because whatever this was, it wasn't going to stay contained for long. And when it surfaced, Someone was going to lose control. The cafe across from headquarters hadn't changed in years. Same corner tables, same muted lighting, same faint smell of coffee and old paper that never quite left the air. I hadn't planned to come here, but after the conversation with HR, after the shift in Emma's tone, the tension she couldn't hide, I knew waiting inside the building was no longer an option. I needed someone who still understood what this company used to be and what it was becoming. When I stepped inside, I saw him immediately. Arthur Calloway sat alone near the window, a newspaper folded neatly beside his cup. He looked exactly the same, older, slower perhaps, but still anchored in a way the rest of the company no longer was. I approached carefully. "Mr. Calloway." He looked up, recognition settling in almost instantly. "Kira," he said, his voice softening. "Sit." I didn't waste time. "There's something you need to see," I said, lowering my voice as I slid the folder across the table. He opened it without a word. I watched his expression change as he read. Not shock, not confusion. Recognition. "They moved faster than I expected," he said quietly. My chest tightened. "So you see it too?" He nodded once, tapping the page lightly. "This isn't restructuring," he said. "This is financial control." I leaned in slightly. He requested elevated access through Ryan. "The transactions are structured to avoid secondary review. It's deliberate." Calloway closed the folder slowly. "And removing you," he added, "was step one." The words landed clean. No emotion, just truth. "I can't prove intent yet," I said, "but the pattern is there." "That's enough," he replied. He slipped the folder into his jacket. "I'll initiate an internal audit." Quietly. I hesitated. "He won't wait for that." "No," Calloway agreed. "He'll try to close whatever gap you've opened." His gaze sharpened. "So you need to be careful." A pause. Then more firmly, "No more direct moves. Let this shift above you." I nodded slowly. Not because I trusted the process, but because I understood the stakes. As I stood to leave, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I glanced down. "He knows you talked." When I looked back up, Calloway was already watching me. And for the first time since this began, I realized something had changed. This wasn't just exposure anymore. It was escalation. By the next morning, the shift was visible. Not loud, not obvious, but precise. 2 security officers stood near the elevators, positioned just far enough apart to look casual, close enough to control movement. Conversations stopped a fraction earlier when I walked past. Screens turned faster. The system had tightened. I reached my desk and powered on my computer. The login screen blinked once, then changed. Access denied. Account deactivated. Please contact IT. No warning. No transition. They'd moved. Fast. I didn't react. Not outwardly. Just reached for my phone, checking the time, letting the moment pass like it didn't matter. At 9:12, there was a soft knock. Emma. Her face gave it away before she spoke. "Kira. Can we talk privately?" I followed her into a smaller meeting room. No glass walls this time. No visibility. The door closed with a quiet click. "They've suspended your system access," she said carefully. "Pending investigation." Investigation into what? She hesitated. "Unauthorized data access. Possible external disclosure." I let the words sit between us. "They're saying I leaked internal information." Emma nodded slightly. "Daniel filed the report late last night." "Of course he did." I leaned back in the chair, steady. "And the board divided," she admitted. "Mr. Calloway is pushing for an independent audit, but CEO approval is required to proceed immediately. And Daniel? He's arguing delay is too costly, that operations can't pause for speculation. Speculation." I almost smiled. "So I'm the variable," I said. Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. "They're building a case," she added quietly, "and they're moving quickly." I stood. "Then they're already late." Her eyes flickered just for a second, like she understood what I meant. When I stepped back into the hallway, the air felt different again, not tense, compressed, like something had already been set in motion. In my office, a box sat neatly on my desk. Please clear personal items before noon. I stared at it for a moment, not surprised, not anymore. Because this wasn't about removing me from the system. It was about isolating me from it. Before something surfaced they couldn't control, I wasn't supposed to be there. That's what made it matter. The message had come an hour earlier, brief, direct. Board review. Be present. No sender name. No explanation. But I knew who it came from. The top floor felt different. Quieter. Controlled in a way the rest of the building never was. Glass walls, closed doors, voices lowered to something closer to strategy than conversation. When I stepped into the conference room, every seat was already filled. Arthur Calloway sat at the head of the table. To his right, an external auditor, Marcus Hale. Calm, composed, detached. Across from them, Daniel. For the first time since this started, he didn't look relaxed. "Thank you for joining us, Ms. Vaughn," Marcus said, gesturing to the empty chair. I sat down, placed my folder on the table, didn't open it. Marcus did that part himself. Over the past 72 hours, we've conducted a preliminary review of financial transactions and access logs within Stratix Dynamics. He paused. Multiple irregularities have been confirmed. A shift in the room. Subtle, but immediate. Funds were routed through a third-party entity, VX Advisory Group, using transaction structures specifically designed to avoid secondary approval thresholds. Daniel leaned forward slightly. That proves nothing. Anyone with system knowledge could. "It was your authorization chain," Marcus said calmly. Silence. Not loud, not dramatic. Final. "We verified access through system certificates, time-stamped against your device activity." I watched Daniel closely. The moment it landed. The fracture. "This is absurd," he said, but the edge was gone. "You're basing this on manipulated data, on her interpretation." "No," Calloway said. One word. Enough. "You removed the only person who could see it," he continued. "And you did it publicly to make sure no one questioned why." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. Marcus closed the folder. "Accounts linked to this authorization have been frozen. Legal review is underway. No raised voices, no chaos, just consequence." And across the table, for the first time, Daniel Mercer looked like a man who had run out of moves. He didn't argue when they asked for his badge. Didn't look at anyone as security stepped in. Daniel Mercer walked out the same way he had walked in months ago, controlled, composed, except now there was nothing behind it. No authority, no leverage, just distance. The door closed softly behind him. And just like that, it was over. Not with applause, not with vindication, but with clarity. 17 years. Reduced, questioned, nearly erased, and then quietly restored. Preston, the CEO, exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath too long. "We should have seen it sooner," he said. Calloway didn't respond immediately. He looked at me instead. "You stayed," he said. "Most wouldn't have." "I almost didn't," I admitted. That was the truth. Because walking away would have been easier, cleaner, but it also would have left everything I built in the hands of someone who never understood it. The board has agreed Preston continue to reinstate your position. And beyond that, we want you leading a new oversight division. Direct reporting line. I nodded slowly. Not because of the title, but because of what it meant. When I stepped back into my office later that evening, everything looked the same. Same desk, same light. But one thing had changed. This time, no one looked away. There was a moment in that room where I could have reacted, defended myself, argued, tried to prove my worth in front of people who had already decided who I was. But I didn't. I chose to stay still, to observe, to understand the system before moving against it. And that choice changed everything. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. If you were in my place, would you fight loudly, or wait until you couldn't be ignored? Stories like this don't just exist for drama. They exist because someone out there is going through something similar right now, quietly. If this meant something to you, a simple, like a comment or a subscription, doesn't just support me, It helps this story reach the person who needs it most. And sometimes that's how real change begins. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.